getting there. It's done, dude. It works better than anyone ever dreamed. Except for me. I knew it was possible, but oh my god, I've literally had people like.
All right, we'll go ahead and get started. So again, thanks everybody for making it out. These are always fun. Some of my favorite Tuesdays of the month. Just hearing the stories of some of the people here in the ecosystem. This is the fourth Tuesday of every month, so you know you can open up the calendar. You'll know when we'll be having these. We've got a lot of programming on Tuesdays, which I'm sure I'll jump into in a second. But just to kind of iterate a thesis that we have here at Capital Factory, this is kind of the brainchild of Josh Barrett, founder and CEO of Capital Factory, the Texas Startup Manifesto. It's something that I believe in, especially as someone not from Texas, seeing that there's 4 major markets all in driving distance of each other. 4 of the 11 largest major markets in the U.S. are all in driving distance of each other, and Austin's the smallest one out of those markets. The 11th largest market in the U.S. Dallas has, I think, is number 7, Houston number 4, San Antonio at 9, as the last census that came out, and we'll have another one next year. But it provides a unique competitive advantage to starting a company here in Texas, 10th largest economy in the world. You know, being super close to potentially new market for you to open up into. Each city having its own competitive advantage. Lots of Fortune 500s up in Dallas. About 10% of them are headquartered up there, so they could be potential customers of yours. Lots of oil money, real estate money that we're looking to get connected with and introduce them into investing into startups. Same thing with Houston, oil money, real estate money that's been there, and they're kind of looking into new types of investments, and that could be startup type companies. Also lots of health tech down there with TMCX. And a lot of deep tech with the universities there as well. And then there's San Antonio. We were there last week for their startup week. It was a lot of fun, a lot of energy down there. Cybersecurity, military veterans, military USA. I think the designation down there. So it's great to be partnered with some of the firms down there as well. So kind of filling out the thesis of we think Texas is really that great place to start a business. And there's lots of reasons why, just to name a couple right there. We've now become the center of defense innovation here in Austin, where we have 3 innovation arms all under one roof. Nowhere else in the U.S. are those 3 innovation arms under the same roof or even in the same city. That's AFWorks, the Air Force innovation arm, DIU, which is the DoD innovation arm, and Army Applications Lab, which is under the Army Futures Command, the 4-star command that moved down here last year, or set up shop down here. And that all happened after Barack Obama came to visit here. After that happened in 2013, Ash Carter, the Secretary of Defense at the time, started showing up, and he wanted to kind of see what all the fuss was about. Why did the president show up to Capital Factory? And it created this halo effect over time that's really helped us become the center of defense for innovation here. So that's on the 8th floor. If you have a company that could be working with either government contractors and or the government itself, that's a great floor to be hanging out on and meeting with different individuals. Like I mentioned, we love Tuesdays here. We have something going on every Tuesday. Intro to Fundraising in Texas, AMA, is on the first Tuesday of the month. We bring in either a VC or an angel here local into town, or one of the angel networks, and we just kind of have a quick panel, AMA, where you can ask your own questions, and we go through a quick presentation as well. Same thing on the second Tuesday, intro to the Austin startup scene. Is anybody new to Austin here? Awesome. There's always a few hands in the room whenever I ask that question. So that's a great, that's coming up in 2 weeks, so that's something I would definitely recommend checking out. Just another great networking event. All these, except for this one, unfortunately, sorry about that, end in a happy hour, so it's a great way to get connected to some other individuals, entrepreneurs in the ecosystem. Intro to Defense Innovation AMA, led by Kevin Landtroop. He's our venture partner on the defense side. On the 3rd Tuesday, and we usually every month have a road trip where we put mentors, investors, and startups all on a bus, and we head to one of the other cities, either Austin outward or other cities to Austin. Force networking, great day to just kind of meet new people and get connected with your business. So they always have an epic office hours, which is like a speed dating with mentors and investors, and fundraising in Texas AMA as well in one of those cities. And then the fourth Tuesday, while we're all here, Founder's Story, these are some of my favorite events of the month. I'm always a big fan of the stories on podcasts of how I built this and all that stuff. So it's fun that we have our own little Austin version, and appreciate you all showing up to that here today. But with that said, I'd like to bring up CF Entrepreneur in Residence, Plug and Play winner, and CEO and founder of Shep Travel at the moment, Daniel Senyard. Perfect. Daniel, thanks. Okay. Awesome. I'm gonna move this over here. So I'm gonna ask him a couple questions to kind of get things kicked off here, and then around 4:20, 4:30, we do have the room to 6. We'll just open it up for y'all. So if you have any questions about his background that start popping up, feel free to jot them down on your phone on some notepad and save it for when we open up to the group. So look forward to hearing some of your questions as well. But it's an easy place to start. What is the story behind Daniel? And actually, let's start here. What number business is Shep for you? Is this?
It's the third startup I'm involved with, the second one that I founded.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So you haven't been scared away yet at this point?
Close, but no.
Got it. Going. Awesome. So what is the story behind Daniel? Where do things begin with you in your entrepreneurial journey?
It's very long, so I'll try and cut out a lot of the rambling. But I grew up in South Africa, didn't have a lot of or any entrepreneurial aspirations. Growing up, there was almost a stink on entrepreneurship. Like, you did that if you couldn't get a job. So like, there weren't a lot of people creating businesses. You just worked your way up. And so I kind of came from that mindset. I'd studied in South Africa, moved over to the UK because I had an English passport with the intention of being an English teacher. And that was always what I was going to be. Met an American woman, moved to the States, decided to want to be a teacher, and moved up to Seattle and started doing copywriting and technical writing at Microsoft and Amazon. And so I started just slowly meandering towards tech, was asked to project manage a team of designers, some developers got involved and that sort of thing, and I always came from a marketing side of things. And we moved down from Seattle to Austin because my wife is from Galveston. We met in London. And I was just working at Keller Williams, the real estate company, in the marketing department, ghostwriting Gary Keller's emails, which is a nightmare because the man does not like punctuation and he writes in all caps. So maybe it's different now, but at that point I did a lot of the marketing emails that went out. And as someone with a writing background, that was like nails on a chalkboard. But yeah, I sort of was there for a few years. Just, my highest ambition was maybe CMO, I guess, was just to work my way up. And I started doing some freelance writing on the side. I kind of got bored of writing just marketing copy, essentially, and interviewed a few startup founders. And one year I was at ACL, big music fan. And my favorite band, The Octopus Project, was playing, and I was all the way at the back and I couldn't see them, and I saw everyone taking photos with their phones. This was kind of the beginnings. This was probably 2009-ish, and I sort of saw this convergence of social media, Gowalla at the time, and Foursquare, and photo sharing. Instagram wasn't a thing yet, and I thought there was an opportunity around that for someone else. But I went back to some of the founders I'd interviewed, and 2 of them were non-technical. And I said, how did you do this? How did you start a tech company without a tech background? And the one guy here in town, his name's Matt Curtin. He worked at Bazaar Voice for a while. He had a startup that was acquired by Bazaar Voice. And he bought me coffee and told me what books to read, what meetups to go to. And don't think we've spoken since. I've tried to reach out, and he's like, yeah, we'll find time at some point. And he just like, here's the whole tool set, off you go. And that one meeting just kind of took me. I read Guy Kawasaki's Art of the Start, which was his recommendation. I started going to all these meetups, and just gradually, sort of came to this idea around music photo sharing, and created a startup called VivoGig, which was kind of Instagram for music. My thinking was, and this is a big lesson learned, was just sort of selection bias or confirmation bias. I talked to other people like me, And it seemed like everyone I talked to went to 4 shows a week, so this is going to be great. And we built a photo sharing app for concerts. And we did stuff with Rolling Stone and Fader magazine, and we got pictures of Josh Groban taking selfies with our app and stuff. But at the end of it all, it was too narrowly focused, and I had some tech missteps, not being technical. And then Instagram came and just took our lunch. And so there's lots I can talk about in that learnings from that startup. But that was kind of how I went from aspiring English teacher to startup founder.
Yeah, absolutely.
Straight line.
Yeah,
Exactly. Yeah. Awesome. So a quick question about what grabs headlines today, and I have my own feelings about venture funding. But was there venture funding involved with Vivo Gig?
Yes. Well, so that was one of the most deceptive experiences. Was I got on stage. There used to be a conference around town about 9 years ago called Rise, and people would put on their own. They had all these venues, and you could propose a session, and then you could host it and put it on. And so there was a pitch session. So I had a pitch deck, nothing more, and I got on stage, and I pitched, and we were last alphabetically, and I pitched, and I didn't know how much we needed or anything. It was just like, I need to start getting reps, getting on stage. And I got off, and this guy grabbed me and took me around the corner and said, if you don't talk to anyone else, I'll give you however much you need. And he was like, how much you need? And I was like, 400,000. He was like, done. Stay here until the crowd goes away, and I will get you a check on Monday. And I was like, this shit is easy. Like, you just you fund it. And yeah, he funded us. He was good to his word. And so he came in as an investor. Josh Bayer personally invested in us at the time. Obviously, this was the heyday of social, user-generated content type startups. We didn't actually have any VC funding. We had a bunch of angels. We had someone from Hulu came in. We had a bunch of advice from MTV and such. But we raised about $700,000. Ran the company for about 3 years. I don't know how deeply you want to go into this, but one of my issues was I needed tech talent. And that's something that every startup founder, aspiring startup founder who can't write code, it's number one on their list is how do they get a technical co-founder. So I'd go to these meetups and say, I've got this idea. Everyone loved the idea of music discovery, geolocated, querying APIs to see who's on stage. You never even had to type in the band's name. It was super hyper focused and such, and everyone would make intros. Oh, this person could be your tech co-founder, but no one was ever really available. And I found one guy, and really nice guy. We're still friends to the day, but there was a reason he was available and sort of sitting around and able to help out. And I had no way to validate how good the code was, and that happened twice with me. And so that was my biggest problem. Was we had a way head start. We were photo sharing, cutting edge, and we just had to rebuild. We got to the point where I was like, crap, we are missing deadlines. We had a launch party at South by, just to bring the story full circle. We had a launch party at Swan Dive on Red River, and I got Octopus Project, who was my favorite band, to actually play the party, our launch party. The line went all the way from Red River to 35. It was like crazy. It was the biggest line. It was covered. And it was just this great thing, but our app wasn't ready. And like that was the hard deadline. Was we were having a launch party at South by, trending on Mashable and all this stuff, but no one could actually download the app. So that was time to kind of cut ties. And what I learned there was, as a non-technical founder, I actually started hiring a firm. I had a group in town called Jackrabbit Mobile at the time. I don't know if they still would do this sort of thing.
I think they're still around.
Yeah, they do. But they were a lot smaller, willing to do little side gigs, I guess. And I just said, I've got a new CTO. Will you do a tech audit? So it was kind of a 3-month write code. At that 3 months, someone else is going to look at your code, identify the problems, and if you get a pass rate, you stay on. And we just had so many false starts. And you get to the point where trying to raise additional funding when you've been around for X amount of time gets difficult, and it gets harder and harder to justify those false starts. So trying to get outside perspective on your tech is very important, I think, as a non-technical founder.
Absolutely. And that was based around the music industry, and Vivo Gig was 4 concerts a week. So that must have been keeping you busy for sure.
Yeah.
We talked about this earlier. When was the last time that you went to a concert?
It was probably a year and a half, 2 years ago. And you know, I was saying to Jamie that one of the common refrains is, you know, do what you love, follow your passion. For me, it killed it. Like, I loved music. I went to concerts all the time, and then I try to raise money, and I try to work with the labels, and I try to work with the festivals, and we did some cool stuff. Like, you could take a photo with our app. There was a big festival in El Paso, and that your photo would show up on the side of a downtown building in real time, and fans could vote on the best photo, and you got to meet the band. And so we did some cool activations, but it was a real uphill struggle, because while social was hot, Napster was not, and CD stores were closing down, and so we sort of had opposite, you know, tides pulling in different directions there. So it was difficult, and it just got to the point where I got really burnt out with the music industry, and you know, your kids also and all that stuff changes things. But I went from being I would go to a show every night I possibly could, to now it's like a absolute afterthought, because I kind of got burnt out by it, which is sad, you know. So I think I'm going to steal someone else's quote and not attribute them because I don't remember. But it's more take your passion with you, don't do your passion, and so like love what you do, don't do what you love, kind of thing. I think that can be important. I mean, if you love yoga and becoming a yoga instructor, I think that probably works out well. But there can be challenges. You can kind of get turned off what you love.
Mm-hmm. Not to turn anybody away from all that.
No, of course.
Everybody's different.
Yeah.
Everybody's different. So what ended up happening with Vivo Gig?
So we had a very big deal. There were a few things that happened. So we had a very big deal with Billboard, Gap, and Lollapalooza. So we were going to be the official photo sharing app of the concert, of the festival. We're going to be built into the Lollapalooza app. All the photos, Gap was paying for sponsorship, so there'd be ad placement within the user-generated content. You would win tickets if you went to Gap's website and voted on the top photo. So it was this great, like, integrated marketing thing. And then the publisher of Billboard quit. And the rest of everyone on Billboard said anything he's ever touched, burn it to the ground. Like, we don't want to touch it. And so we went from everything. This was our big, you know, all our eggs were in one nest and one basket, and it just disappeared underneath us. At the same time, there was a VC fund. This was our first venture capital. Was going to be a fund called Hurt and Harbach. And Brett Hurt was kind of in between things and was going to be a VC, and then decided he wanted to be an operator. Justifiably so. He's obviously done great things with his new company, you know, Data.World. But we were sort of in between that stage, and so we were having them. They were going to fund our next stage, and they kind of broke up as well. So there are some things where timing just doesn't work for you. There's definitely a lot of mistakes on our side, a lot of lessons learned being a first-time founder, but there were some forces that we also sort of butted up against, I think.
Absolutely.
And that's one of the things that I regret the most is we had amazing user-generated content. We owned the licenses to. We had approaches from Getty for this content, and we were trying to work out a deal and everything. And by the end of it, it just was such a drain. It just disappeared. Like, we didn't do anything with it. We didn't try and sell it. We didn't try and get rid of the assets, sell the assets or anything. It just like drained our souls at the end. It was really, really tough. It was, you know, when some of these things fell through and we were right on the cusp of, you know, big success, these big national, global deals and such, when those went away, we kind of all just went our separate ways, and it wasn't a very good exit, or ending at least. And you know, I was telling Jamie, I had a meetup in town, travel tech meetup, and it had 1,400 members. This was just earlier this year, and it got to the point where it was so big and unwieldy, I didn't know what to do with it. I couldn't support it and grow my business because I had to find sponsors, speakers, venues, all that sort of stuff. And I thought back, it was like, this is not something I should just disappear. So I actually had my meetup acquired. I went around and knew a few groups. I was like, hey, I've got this community of passionate travel tech enthusiasts who are just looking for a place to gather, and I found an acquirer. And so, that was one of my lessons, was make sure that, no matter what it is, someone can find value in it, and that I found true for a meetup group of all things. So.
That's interesting. I don't know how often you see meetup groups getting acquired. I think that really poses an interesting potential lesson, and something that I've been reading about a lot lately is building community for your business. How did that concept, did it just kind of happen serendipitously for you, or was it something that you learned about and you were like, I'm gonna deploy that? Because it was a travel tech, which is more relevant to after Vivo Gig. With TripChamp, I believe it was, and then now Shep Travel, which is also a travel tech startup. So how did that kind of all begin for you?
So I'd say it was, part of it was my tech ineptness with Vivo Gig, where I didn't have a co-founder, I didn't know how to write code, but I had this idea and I wanted to get it going. And so I actually started a music blog and a podcast, and I figured this way I would build an audience, and at some point I could flip that and say, hey, by the way, I've proven my credibility, you've read my interviews, you've listened to the podcast, and now we have a photo sharing app where you can share your passion for live bands. And so probably for about 6 months before we even talked about the tech, I had this very active blog, and I'd have musicians guest blog, and the podcast. This happens all the time these days, but 9 years ago it wasn't really happening much, was I would have the bands, and again this was a little bit of laziness or efficiency, we'll call it. Instead of me doing all the research, I'd get the bands to reach out to their fan base on Twitter and submit questions. And so I created a quick Google form, and so I'd interview the bands with the fan questions, which meant the fans were going to listen in and that sort of thing. So I sort of was trying to work out ways. I didn't want to be a lone voice shouting in the dark, people who don't even know what a podcast is in 2010. Now I had the fans and a built-in, every artist would bring their fan base with, and then they'd subscribe and the blog, and we were just building up interest and credibility in the music tech space before launching the tech product, basically. And then when I was at TripChamp, which was a company in between, I wasn't a founder there. I was the chief product officer.
But that was after that was the next step after Vivo Gig.
I wanted to do a meetup because I found so much friction trying to get into the travel industry. There was so much technology, and it's a lot of legacy, old tech, and it's very difficult to understand. There's so many acronyms, and starting off was tough, and I really struggled with it myself. And as I built up a network and understanding, I was like, there's no reason we can't all benefit from this. So I wanted to do that at TripChamp. The CEO just didn't think it was worth doing, really. And then with Shep, I immediately created that group. And we went corporate travel. Shep is a corporate travel thing, and almost everyone who has a travel tech idea enters the industry in consumer tech. So these weren't built-in customers or anything. This was really trying to give back, but also maybe we find a future employee there or an investor or whatever. It was definitely not a one-to-one benefit. Vivo Gig was like, this listener is going to be a user of our app. This is a lot more long tail.
Got it. And then, travel tech being next, did you know somebody at TripChamp, or did you have a thesis around travel tech? What was your thought there in terms of heading that as your next step of your career?
Dumb luck. I basically, at the end of Vivo Gig, I was kind of burnt out. My wife was burnt out. We've been living on not a lot of money for a while, and there gets that point where you're like, I just want paycheck, health insurance, and stability. And this was after 3 years of the sort of startup roller coaster. And as you guys will know, if you do have someone at home, it's great to go home to your husband, wife, significant other, whatever. But you also, it gets tough when you tell them everything, because the highs are high and the lows are low, and you have the in-between context. You've got the gray area that kind of keeps you floating, whereas for someone who's not in that, it can be quite a lot of whiplash going on. And so I was interviewing for product manager jobs. I kind of looked at my experience coming from marketing and said, at Vivo Gig, I did pretty much everything. What did I enjoy the most? And I sort of thought it was probably managing the roadmap, product-related stuff. So I went and applied to a bunch of jobs. I had 2 job offers with Dell, and the night before accepting a product manager job in a cubicle, I looked on Craigslist, and there was a thing for a well-funded stealth startup looking for a head of product. And my wife said, just do it. She was like, I know you're gonna hate working in a big company. Just go for it, find out about it. And it was a AI startup, using a lot of predictive AI and neural networks in the travel space. And I love traveling, I love music. I didn't get to travel all the time, obviously, so it's kind of a different world. But yeah, I came in as head of product and learned the industry kind of from scratch. And I was there for about 3 years as the head of product.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you went to Dell, maybe we wouldn't be
Yeah,
chatting here today.
totally.
Interesting. So, kind of getting back to the earlier point, like with building that community and building that travel tech meetup, how did that help out with Shep there as well? Was there any benefit to building that community and launching Shep?
I don't know if there was a direct. It definitely allowed me to get investors who are in town. For me, it showed me in a good light. Like, you're in town, we're having coffee, but hey, by the way, I've also got this meetup group that I've created a community around this. This is going to be, fertile ground for us to recruit from, for us to launch into, for partnerships, that sort of thing. So I do think there's kind of a reputational thing around that, but there definitely wasn't we didn't get a customer out of that or anything. But for me, it also allowed me to build direct partner or relationships with people from HomeAway and Expedia and such that I wouldn't have had, because when you do have a media outlet, whether it's a podcast or a meetup group, you can kind of knock on anyone's door and say, hey, I hear you in town, do you have an hour to give? And they may not give you that time otherwise. So I think that's beneficial, is when you have that weight behind you, that's something else. You've got a community who's interested in someone's perspective. They're a lot more responsive as well. And I found that with the bands. If I reached out to Fits and the Tantrums and said, hey, can we partner? They'd be like, I'd go away. But I've got all these bands that I've now interviewed up to that point, and they're super excited and reaching out and saying, we want to be interviewed by you. It changes the whole kind of dynamic, I guess.
Yeah, it's a super interesting and can be a potential tool as well for your business. It's not just physical meetups either. It's those digital meetups or digital groups as well, like building something on Facebook and just inviting people to. It can just be a hotbed for, like you said, talent, potential partnerships. Depending on if you're a B2C, maybe it's B2C, potential customers that are interested in what you're doing. So I think that's always a super interesting, time-consuming, of course, but the job is. So just something to think about, and I think your experience kind of proves that out a little bit.
And with the way we did it was you know where you want to get to, but you can't start there. So we definitely, I just went to a local band and watched them, and afterwards I was like, hey, would you be willing to do an interview? And then I looked at their schedule and saw who they toured with, and I went to one of those bands and said, hey, you've heard of these guys, they've done this, and you just slowly work your way up until you're having tea with Metallica, or Megadeth at least, yes. You kind of, it's a long journey, but you sort of just gradually building credibility and sucking up people. So I think it's one of those things, obviously bands is one thing, but just interviewing people or partnerships or anything, you're always trying to build that case that you have credibility, other people have trusted you. In my job now, we're getting case studies and testimonials from Fortune 500s. It's the same principle. You just work with someone smaller that someone slightly bigger has probably heard of, and saying someone like you got this benefit from working with us. And so I think that carries through.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I think there's a point to where you're building, or you're trying to be on all the panels and stuff like that, but you're not actually doing anything in the background. So building false credibility can also be a thing too, something to kind of think about. So earlier you mentioned a pitch competition. That was for Viva Gig. It was the UGC time was kind of hot. You also have had times where you're on the international pitch circuit, Plug and Play being one of those. Do you mind telling us a little bit about that circuit that you've been on, or and what companies that was for? Is that Shep, or was that TripChamp, Vivo gig?
So for TripChamp, I pitched in this room to the Oslo Innovation Council. They picked a bunch of like 10 different capital factory startups to present, and we won. I think it was Texas company most likely to succeed in Europe, and the prize was a flight to Oslo to go and be a semi-finalist at a startup event in Oslo called, it was something about 1,000 startups or something. I want to say 500 startups, I don't know, that's not it. 500 startups was there. But anyway, so, and that was kind of a cool experience because what TripChamp did was it normalized a lot of different travel sources. You've got your big ones, your Expedias and such, but there's all these little guys, these consolidators that have really great rates. Oftentimes the cancellation terms suck, but you can save a lot of money if you can find these. And it normalized all this stuff. And so the prize was they would pay for me to go out there, and was like, well, can we book it through TripChamp? And we're like, sure. And we booked it and we saved them 50%. And they were like, wow, well, that's pretty great. Why don't you bring your wife? We'll pay for her to come as well. So my wife got a free holiday to Oslo. So it was kind of cool winning the contest. And yeah, I also then got to pitch in London, which was a funny experience because myself and a guy here you guys may know called Andy Jones, he's a Brit. The two of us are invited out to London to go represent Austin. And we're in the back, and the keynote speaker walks on with the opening address wearing a cowboy hat, and he says, you might wonder why I'm wearing this, but we've got a bunch of Texans in the house. Hey, Texans, stand up. And it's a South African and a Brit, kind of keeping our mouths very quiet, but yeah. Yeah, then also won a bunch of local pitch contests. I guess the biggest one would be Plug and Play, so it's a big fund and accelerator in the Bay Area. And so they've got different, you know, sort of verticals, and so we were in the travel and hospitality one. And so we went through their 3-month program and did the pitch there, and we won that, which was great. It was, you know, 2018 December kind of thing. So we were the 8th cohort in the travel and tech, and they came in as an investor. And that was really good because that is a, you know, from a fundraising standpoint, corporate development standpoint, Plug and Play is very well recognized. And so having won that, having them as an investor, all that stuff has definitely helped. But I will get on stage, I'll do the pitches, the founders' breakfasts, or whatever they're called. I get on stage as often as I can. I'm getting those reps in. I still today probably won, you know, 7, 10 pitch contests. I still get nervous. I still hate sitting like up front. I want to sit at the back, and I ask someone to text me when it's my turn. I'll go walk the hallways. I still like, it doesn't matter how many times I've done it. I still have that nervous energy. So, yeah.
Awesome. Well, kind of leading into the Shep conversation, tell us about how that idea and concept kind of came to fruition in your mind, and then, you know, making the leap back into the entrepreneurial side of things. So
with TripChamp, I was there for 3 years. We got an investment from Amadeus, which is a big travel technology company. I try to manage that relationship in India by Skype in 3 in the morning kind of thing. And after a while realized I had to do it in person. Went there for 2 weeks, realized I had to do it in person for longer, so my wife and that's my daughter in the back there, we all moved to New Delhi and lived in New Delhi for about 4 months. And at the end of that, I was kind of ready to break out and do something on my own again. And so I came back, and I had my two lead engineers said, hey, if you're leaving, we're leaving. Whatever you do next, we want to do it with you. And so that was a huge sign for me that maybe I should kind of keep doing this. I went to a recruiter who had found me these guys, and I said, look, I think I'm probably going to want just a bit of stability for a while. Again, I keep going through this, you know, getting dragged back into startups. But I went to him and I said, hey, you know, what do you think? Can you get me a job, basically? And he said, look, I've recruited 5 people for you. They all love working with you. They all want to work with you again. So not only will I not find you a job, I'll be your first investor in whatever you do next. And I was like, this is not happening. And then, Josh asked me to be an entrepreneur in residence here. So I knew I had some backing from Capital Factor as well. So I essentially was in a very privileged position based on my history of now having technical co-founders and funding without an idea. So I spent a few months here just meeting with a lot of mentors and just trying to think about what to do next. And I came out of the travel tech experience realizing companies wanted data, control, and reporting, and savings. And everyone assumes the only way you can do that in corporate travel is through like Concur, like a single source where you log in and you book just what's there. And so I've just been playing around with, I use a lot of extensions in my life, browser extensions, and thought that we could prompt people and capture data using a browser extension. So instead of forcing everyone into one place, we could open up the whole travel world and let people book an Expedia with guidance and data capture and integrate that back in. And so that's kind of where the idea came from, was having been embedded in the biggest travel tech company in the product team, really spending a lot of time with their customers, their end users, and understanding what the kind of core problems they were trying to solve were, kind of unwinding, and I actually made a to-don't list. It's like, I don't want to issue tickets. I don't want to pick up phone, do customer service. Travel, there's a lot of fraud, and I sort of said, what's left? I've moved from real estate to music to travel. I do want to stay in the travel space because I've now got some credibility. We won Focusrite, which is the biggest travel tech conference. We won that, so like, coming out of TripChamp, I had some good network going, and I decided I wanted to stay there, but I had the ability to say what I don't want to do. And I looked at what was left, which was data, guidance, etc. And so, that's kind of where the idea came from.
Awesome.
Long answer.
No worries, appreciate it. So that tech team that came over from TripChamp, they're still with the team today?
Yeah.
Awesome.
So my two, at the time, I think our biggest we got to was, I think we were at 10, and of the 10, 6 had worked with me before.
Wow. Awesome.
So one guy from Keller Williams is our UX designer. Lainey, who's our sort of ops person, director of operations, she was my intern at Vivo Gig. I then worked with her at TripChamp as a junior product manager, and now here. So it's just kind of a shortcut. When you're trying to recruit, it's super difficult, and then onboarding and building up trust and that sort of thing. And so I often get asked, I need a CTO, where do I get one? I got my CTO over the course of 8 years across multiple companies of just slowly working with people, getting to know them. So I don't have a silver bullet answer. If you guys have been to the co-founders wanted meetups, everyone who gets on stage wants a CTO, and everyone who's looking for a job is a sales or marketing person. There's a bit of a mismatch, and so it is challenging. One of the things I learned though as well is not to hire a CTO. My opinion is hire someone, give them the title that they can work up to CTO, but it's so much easier to promote someone to CTO from like VP of engineering or whatever you want to call them, than it is to demote them when you realize, hey, we're now at our Series B and we now need a professional CTO who's more of a visionary than just a coder. And I know it's very tempting and easy to give the C titles away as compensation when you're negotiating with people. So I'm not saying don't do it. It certainly is part of the discussion. But I have hired people as CTOs and realized that that's not the right title for them. And it's just it's a tough conversation to say, in 3 years' time we're gonna have to demote you because ego comes into play at that point.
Yeah, I think understanding that finding a CEO or a CTO, and I speak with more people looking for CTOs than I do CTOs looking for CEOs. It's not an overnight type of deal when it comes to that. It's more of a building a relationship. I know people who've become CTOs or co-founders together after working at a hackathon together. It's like, hey, let's try this out first. Let's not just jump right into it. Because then they get a 50-50 split into what you're working on. It could go south pretty quick. So with Shep, brought on a couple people from the previous company. There was some financing from Plug and Play, it sounds like. Did you raise other capital with Shep Travel?
Yeah, we've raised about 2 million, soon to be around 3, from capital factories come in. One of my guy who grabbed me off the stage, he's come in as well. That was actually because of Josh. Josh Bayer told me, it was like, the people you lose money for, they're the first people you go to with your next idea. And for me, that felt so counterintuitive. I was sort of like, I feel really bad. Like, I was honest and I was, apologized and all that stuff. And he said, they've paid for your education. Like, your second company, you're going to be better than your first. You're going to have learned so much. And so if they suddenly see you build a company that takes off and you didn't offer them the opportunity to come in again, that's really insulting. And he was like, I'd be very upset if I funded someone, they learned off my back, and I wasn't part of the next thing. And so I went to this guy and I said, hey, and we've kept in touch. We've had coffee and lunch and stuff, so we've kept a good relationship. We just haven't talked about startup-y stuff in a while. And I just said, look, this business is going, we've got funding, we've got all this stuff, but I want to offer you the opportunity to come in. I'm not asking for it, I don't need it. And he was like, yeah, here's the money. I was like, do you want to know what it is? Do you want to, projections? He was like, no. He was like, I've seen you grow, I've seen you learn, I'm invested in you, and what you do now is probably not what your guys will end up doing within 2 years. So I'm betting on you, and I'm in. No questions asked. So those relationships, being able to stay up, honest with people, being able to communicate on time, not only communicating when it's dire times, just keeping conversations going before and after. I think definitely for me have paid off from team, investors, all sorts of stuff.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, it does feel counterintuitive. That's kind of interesting.
Yeah.
I haven't heard that advice before.
Yeah.
But it does make sense, and especially the way you approach it too, like keeping that relationship, being open, being transparent about losing their money.
Yeah.
It's not like you just kind of ghosted them, which I've heard of situations like that in people's past. So I think that approach is super smart. I think we're getting close to. I'm open to opening it up to the crowd a little bit. I don't know that you'll remember this, but my first day was actually listening to him pitch for Mobility X way back in the day.
Oh, okay, yeah.
So that was my first day at Capital Factory. So it's just kind of interesting to kind of see this come a little bit full circle.
With
but
Sam, right?
Yep, with Sam,
yeah, okay.
absolutely. So I just thought that was a fun little note. But if you have other questions that you want to kind of just raise your hand and speak up about, we'll kind of get that going.
Wait, so how long ago was your first day?
My first day was April of 2018.
Okay.
And that was actually an interesting experience because at the time, Shep was focused on SMBs. And so I was pitching, mobility, pitching...
Daimler.
Yeah, Daimler. And he was the CTO of, what's it called?
Which one?
The small cars.
Smart. Yeah, no, Car2Go.
Car2Go, yeah. So the CTO of Car2Go, I was pitching him on like, hey, here's how we help small businesses start to manage their travel, start to get some intelligence around their travel spend. And he said, okay, so I can drop Concur and cancel my Amex account, my travel agency, and just work with you guys. I was like, no, please do not do that. Like, we cannot handle you. And that was actually the first step in us pivoting up to enterprise. So we're now working with big oil and gas company in Houston and Microsoft and such. So like we're working with much bigger clients. We kind of came into the market thinking we're going to slowly kind of build up from SMBs to enterprise. And that was the first meeting where I saw that the demand or the interest from moving away from some of the traditional tools was very strong, even all the way up at the top of the market.
Awesome. All right, y'all.
So have you become better at identifying characteristics you look for, like CTO, or also distinguishing between CTO and a programmer? That's probably a big deal now.
Yeah, I mean, the way I think about CTO these days is a lot more kind of visionary. It's really, you want someone who is not just writing code. You do want someone who's hands in code, but my perspective is definitely I want someone who's reading, educating themselves, trying to stay on top of things, not just doing a job. Because there's lots of people who can write great code and they can, do all of that. But you want someone who can think with you as a co-founder and as a CEO. You're sort of looking at what we have to execute on now, but what is the potential growth. And you know, for a CTO, ideally you want someone who can kind of think and see where the technology is going and sort of propose, you know, maybe we could adopt technology X, Y, and Z in the future. Definitely not easy to find. So you know, you do what you have to. I mean, sometimes you just have to work with a agency in India to build a prototype, to raise your first funding, to be able to afford a CTO. Like there's no direct linear way to kind of solve the tech in an early stage company. But you know, I just caution on putting too much reliance on someone and tying, you know, giving huge amounts of equity to someone who you don't know how to validate. Like you really want to make sure your vesting schedules are set up so they're earning equity over time. And for me, just putting those waypoints to say after 3 months, nothing personal, I'm going to bring in a third-party group I'm going to pay them $300, and they're just going to look at the code and say, yeah, good or bad. Because having gone through multiple CTOs, especially with VivoGig, very rare for a engineer to come in and go like, oh, this code's great, I'm just going to keep working on this. They always want to rip it down. The usual refrain is, it's going to take me longer to fix this than to start again. And that kills you. That kills any momentum. So I think there's lots of ways to justify that, wanting to do those code audits without making that person feel like they're being attacked. We as a company need to maintain high quality code. We want to move fast, but we also need to sort of we don't want to build up too much tech debt. And so there's a fine balance there. But you know, if you've got a deadline coming, you also need someone who can say, all right, I'm going to stop reading and I'm going to get my hands dirty and I'm really going to work. And I don't know if you need a CTO in your seed stages. Like you definitely need a technical co-founder. Don't think you need a CTO. You know that's a big hire. You want someone, when you give that title, it needs to be the right fit. So I'm a big advocate. I've got a CTO, so I don't always practice what I preach, you know, in an ideal world, in a vacuum. But getting that tech lead is very important. I talked to a VC who said he would not invest unless there was a technical co-founder involved, because as soon as the cash runs out, the paid developer disappears. And so he was like, you need someone with lots of equity, lots of skin in the game, as a technical co-founder, and he doesn't invest in anyone without that. So it is super important, but the titles is something you can kind of work around.
I think Y Combinator doesn't invest without a technical co-founder, is that right?
Yeah, I think so.
We'll go there and then in the back.
Do you mind touching a little more on what you're up to right now?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so we have a browser extension that large enterprises install, and so when an employee goes to Airbnb or Expedia, which happens about 30% of the time in air, 50% of the time in hotels, we pop up guidance and say, you shouldn't be here, or make sure this is refundable, or you can only spend $500 a night in a hotel in New York. And then when they book, it analyzes the booking data and says, hey, you're overspending, give us a reason why. And so it basically is guiding their behavior and capturing the data. And so for the company's perspective, they're getting real-time insights. They've got a big blind spot right now. And so we're kind of filling in the data blind spot there. But some of the stuff we're working on now is a lot more traveler-centric. We don't want to just be seen as Big Brother that's tattling on you when you go where you're not meant to. We're looking at comparison. So when you look at a Hilton on hotels.com, we actually would query the Concur's content and say the same hotel is available in Concur, but it has free Wi-Fi, 1,000 bonus points, late checkout. So yes, you might save $5 in hotels.com, but there's a lot of perks. So we're sort of trying to educate, and that's where the name comes from. We're trying to shepherd good behavior, trying to be the advocate for the traveler. Funny story there on naming, like we named the company Comply, because we're like, Concur, Comply, sounds great. And then in the SMB market, we started trying to get employees to install a browser extension that would tell their boss what they were doing, called Comply. So we definitely had to do a lot of repositioning. You know, we're trying to help and assist. And there's a big thing called duty of care. If Microsoft sends you to Kuala Lumpur and there's an earthquake, they need to know where you are to get you back safely. If you booked on Expedia, they have no idea where you are. So there's also kind of a safety angle on that.
I really appreciate what you're saying about being conservative would be the CTO title.
Yeah.
I'm a clinical founder of a tech company, so I've got a lot of this stuff to figure out that I'm not so familiar with. And I have two questions. One, what is the title that you would give or call or need for that first key technical person? And secondly, I understand there's 3 ways to get into tech. School, quick studies, and self-studies. And I was wondering what your thoughts are about, looking for that visionary you were talking about, that eventually that person that you're going to want to, create that. So anyway, I was wondering what your thoughts are about,
Well, say on the different paths, like my favorite person to work with, one of my co-founders, started as a, what is the Best Buy equivalent of the Genius Bar, the nerds, the Geek Squad, yeah. So he was Geek Squad, he was just tech support, and he just did that and showed interest in something else, and then went into tech support in the call center and showed interest in something else. And so no education in tech, and just gradually worked his way up. And the reason he's so great is he's an incredible engineer, but he also has I can put him in front of any customer, any investor. He has great people skills because he doesn't come from that traditional tech track. Maybe it took him longer to get there, to get up to his skill set, but he's very broad and skilled in other things. So I wouldn't say that you have to get someone out of a coding school or out of something. I don't know, it's really tough to find those people. Those people, a true CTO is employed already. They're not sitting around waiting for a startup, and so I'd say that it is, and that's part of why I say it's probably more of a Series A, Series B problem. When you have the cash to recruit and bring them into your fast-growing startup, they're a startup starting to go stale, it's not as exciting anymore, come over. So I would say, and it's really a conversation, but I'd say probably VP of engineering would be a good title, but you probably need them more than they need you, so it really is a discussion. If you give away the CTO title, it's not the end of the world at all. But if you are looking at saying, we're going to have to bring in you, and fairly soon we're going to have to bring in someone junior to you or senior, that can immediately direct the conversation to say, I need to be able to hire above you because you've only got 3 years of experience. I mean, like I said, I've built companies with very junior people and had to hire above, and then I've gone in with co-founders at the CTO level, and so it's not something you have to solve on day one, but it's a conversation. I'd love for you to join my company. What's important? Is title important? Is it equity? Is it, you don't necessarily need to go in and say, here's the only way I'll work with you. You accept this, it's really a kind of weighing those things, I think.
Yeah, I think what I heard out of that too is expectation setting.
Yeah.
They can come in as a CTO, they can help hold that title, but as long as they either evolve into a CTO by just doing the work and becoming the visionary that you talk about, that's potential. That doesn't happen overnight. It's something they can evolve into, or saying, hey, look, we're going to need to bring somebody in senior who's done this before, and they're going to take us to the moon.
But I think as the founder or CEO, the same's true for you. What got you here won't get you there. You may not be the right person when you're in your growth phase. So I think acknowledging that is also important and saying, look, I may have to hire someone above you. We may have to hire someone above me. No one is sort of infallible or untouchable. So I think recognizing that for the good of the company, we all have to be focused on the growth and the success of the company, which may mean I or you end up having to be demoted. And I think that if you set that up front and bring yourself into that, not just picking on them, I think that's a good way to address it as well.
That's a really good point too with the CEO thing. We've had a portfolio company recently. The CEO demoted himself so that they could bring on a Capital Factory mentor to be the CEO to take the company forward. Yeah. So that's a really, really good point. I think I saw a question back there. You good? And then we'll go to John.
So I have sort of the opposite problem. I am the CTO. My question revolves around business development. So you've gotten into all of these enterprises, and even though you're a new company, probably less than 2 years old, I'm guessing.
Yeah, 2 years.
About 2 years. So you've gotten hooks into these large companies. How did that process transpire, and how did you get the right people to kind of approach those companies?
So it's very industry dependent. I'd say for us in the travel industry, the way I've done it is conferences. So conferences need content. They're always looking for panelists and pitches and all that stuff. So I just hit the conference circuit hard and just got seen, got my name, got the company logo in all the programs, and gradually over, you know, my second, my third conference, people were like, oh yeah, we've seen you, we've been talking about you and that sort of thing. That's really how it's done. I mean, our biggest customer, which is the oil and gas company, I happened to be standing behind the guy in the lunch line, and he was like, oh yeah, I saw what you guys did, really cool. It's not a problem we would have, but you know, super cool. We sat down, we had lunch. His tech guy came and sat next to him, and he was like, yeah, did you see? Oh yeah, that's so cool, so cool. Yeah, you know, I was telling him we would never need that service because everyone books where they have to book. They follow the rules. And the tech guy was like, I booked on Expedia yesterday. You have no idea what you're talking about. So customer, like that's how, you know, and so it's really just FaceTime in those big companies because they get inbound all the time. And when you do go to the conferences, they're sending, for me, the head of corporate travel is the one who attends the corporate travel conferences. Okay. And I don't do TechCrunch, I don't do any of those sort of things anymore. I really do like, where are my customers? And so different industries are going to have different places, yeah. But for the travel industry, there's like 2 big corporate buyer conferences, and I'm on stage at every one of those and volunteer to do anything and everything they'll let me.
Very cool.
Yeah. So how did you get into interviewing founders and entrepreneurs specifically? Like, were you going to doors, knocking on them and bugging them, or did somebody get your foot in the door, or like how would somebody like me start one of those?
Trying to
where you said you kind of got your initial start just interviewing entrepreneurs.
Oh yeah, sure, okay.
Like,
so I mean, these days, start a Medium, you know, just start writing on Medium. Like, you don't need a channel. I was working with some online magazine, basically, and I just volunteered a lot. I wasn't getting paid for it, so like, Student Universe was one. Like, there was a print magazine, and I just slowly, because I wanted to be a writer and an educator. Like, I was trying to build up my portfolio of writing, so I would just reach out, and so this was like, hey, I write with X. You know, we've got a readership of Y. I'd love 10 minutes of your time. Here's some questions I'm going to ask you, and I just did it like that. I mean, it wasn't too tricky at the time. There wasn't, you know, it was like I said, 9-10 years ago, so a little bit less crowded. I was able to kind of get to, you know, pretty high level people, you know, at South by and, you know, in some of the top tech startups. But it was really just a, hey, I'm writing about this. Here's the angle. I think you're super interesting for these reasons, and this is who's going to read it or listen to it or whatever the case was. Yeah.
I think you'd be surprised at how open some
Yeah.
founders can be, especially if you say you're trying to start something. You know, you can position what you're starting as like an entrepreneurial endeavor. And so it come from the founder bond of, you know, hey, trying to start something, you know, put your name on it, you can blast it out to your network, leveraging your network at the same time to get some people, second degree connections on LinkedIn, all that good stuff.
And set those expectations. So this is only going to take 10 minutes, like whatever the number is. So like for me now, I have to gather testimonials because that's what helps in my sales. And so I go in and say, I'll pre-write the testimonials, you just bless it or edit it. I need a case study, I'm going to pre-write everything. I just need you to fill in these couple KPIs that we're going to measure before and after. And you just want to do as much of the work for them as possible and really say, this is going to be such a light lift for you, I'm going to do everything. I just need you to glance over this and confirm it. And that's like, I think probably I've collected, let's say 20 testimonials over the last 4 years across the 2 companies. And I don't think any of them were written from scratch. Like all of them, I write 3, I'm like, here are 3 options. They obviously are coming from the angle I want, but they're honest. It's what I think they would probably say. And they might do a couple tweaks and edits in there, but asking someone to take the time of their day to stop and think and be considerate and articulate and write something versus just like, yeah, that sounds about right. That helps a lot.
You're not going to get Craig Keller to write one for you?
Chris, you got one?
Going back to Vivo Gig.
Yeah.
In that space,
like where things were going well, but before Lollapalooza, before the funding fell through? And
Yeah.
what was your idea then of what a glorious future would look like? And do you think if you'd had the technical issues buttoned up from the beginning, would things have turned out better?
You know, another thing we had though, and this again
Because
is
that's a really odd time.
Yeah.
You didn't see Instagram coming.
yeah, totally.
And I can see it, all the crap on the billboards and stuff. That's really exciting stuff.
Yeah.
So what were you headed towards?
When we had the Eagles, the NFL, they reached out and they were like, hey, this is super cool. We want to do better fan engagement in stadium. And the advice you get all the time is focus, focus, focus. We're like, no, we're good. Like, we got this music thing. We're not interested in entering, sports. That'll be next. That'll be our next one. And so that's where we saw ourselves going, is sort of like vertical specific crowd engagement at concerts. And a lot of people hated us because they're like, you're encouraging people to take photos. And we were sort of saying, look, they're doing it anyway. Like, here they don't have to type out any hashtags like on Twitter. We're automatically categorizing the place, the band. We're even capturing the song. Like, there's all this stuff. And so they actually can take a photo quicker and put their phone away. So we were trying to do that. But yeah, we thought that music was going to be our proof point, that we could engage, passionate fans, sell tickets to them. At the time, we had like iTunes links so you could buy the songs. This photo was taken during this song. Click here to buy the track and stuff. And we thought that having such an engaged audience of passionate fans, this is a home run. We just found that it wasn't sticky. Like music and concerts is so episodic, and the same with travel. Most people go to a show once every 6 months or so, and so keeping up that real estate, maintaining that spot on their iPhone for 6 months and then remembering to use it again in the future just didn't work out. And that's one of the struggles with consumer travel, and why we're in corporate. That was one of my to-don't lists. I don't want to do consumer because you have to win every single traveler, every single trip, because they're so far apart, and it becomes very commoditized. So, yeah.
Daniel, you've had quite a career. I'm going to ask you a question about the word co-founder.
Yeah.
That seems to be coming up a lot in probably the last 5 years.
Okay.
The old days, we used to call it a partner.
Sure.
But have you always had a co-founder? Have you always launched with the idea of having a co-founder with you? Or have you launched some of your projects by yourself?
No, it's all been with someone else. Even the meetup group. I wanted a second person. I always felt that I don't know enough. I need someone to bounce ideas off. I need someone to call me on my shit. I really want, it's easy to get in your own bubble and believe your own hype. And so I always want someone there. And so I've made sure to always have a second. My Vivo gig I launched with the design UI UX guy. And for me, because I wanted technical, I couldn't find technical off the bat, but obviously a consumer-facing music has to look and feel great, and so I really prioritize design. The other companies are pretty much, a lot of the time have used design agencies because it hasn't been quite as important, at the early stages, so it really depends where you are, what your industry is, but yeah, I think always having a second person is pretty important. I think getting more than 4, there's definitely been successful companies. Later in life, startups that may be more viable, but I think especially starting out, if you're new in the startup game, there's so much like what is a safe node versus a convertible node. There's so many little intricacies that you don't know about, that even if it's just we need more than one person to look up and work this stuff out, even if neither of you have experience. But my recommendation would be to sort of have a second person. And I brought in, with Vivo Gig, I brought in a co-founder, which I felt a bit weird about, but the title was very important to him. He came in 2 years after the fact. So he wasn't a true co-founder, but we really wanted to elevate him because he was the head of rock promotion at Warner Music. And so having him on the deck as a co-founder gave us instant credibility, and he brought us Billboard and Bullet for My Valentine, all these like Grammy-winning bands, and Josh Groban and stuff. And so like really saying this is not just an employee, this guy is at the top. That was important as well. So I'm just not too precious about titles. I think that it can be negotiated about. Best practices aren't always the reality. So your co-founder doesn't always have to be there on day 2.
I heard you say earlier that it was important to have a technical co-founder.
Yeah.
And I don't have one, and I wasn't planning on having one. Is that a bad idea?
I mean, you can get stuff done without it. You can be very successful without it. But you know, it just takes. I've met enough investors who say they won't invest without it. For me to go like that's a hurdle that I don't need to live with. It doesn't. I don't know what I gain by not having that person. You know, but maybe they get a slightly higher equity cut without it. But again, you know, title is a title. It doesn't really change much. So if you were going to give them 5-10% of the company, throwing in a co-founder title is not the end of the world for you. And I think it puts a lot of people at ease knowing that you're able to execute, not just be the ideas person, but you have someone alongside you who can do the execution.
What if raising money isn't so much of an issue? So that aside,
Okay.
is it smart to have a technical co-founder, or just work with somebody and have them come up more organically, like you were talking about with the VP of engineering?
I think that's okay. I think you can sort of, yeah, I think if, you know, from my perspective, the most important thing is to have someone that you feel you can trust, who's vested in the company, who really cares, and is going to be looking out for things in the good and the bad times. That when things go tough, or you suddenly run into some sort of regulatory issue that seems tough to get past in your industry, that you're not going to have someone go like, yeah, this is too much work, I'm just going to leave. So part of being a co-founder is you now have the responsibility to your investors. You've got a fiduciary responsibility. So that person is more closely tied to you and your long-term outcome than someone who's just an employee. And so there's reasons there to kind of like bring more loyalty in long-term, because you just never know what's coming. But I'd say the main reason would be fundraising. And so if that's not an issue, it's not the end of the world. But
Yeah, 'cause I was thinking we're definitely going to be having to hire the CEO.
Yeah.
Because none of the co-founder, that's not what we're good at and what we do. And I was thinking too, hiring the CTO, you know, but I like what you were talking about, because you don't want to get married right away, you know?
Yeah.
Or I understand that concept, so, okay.
And the best practice is always with anyone is just having that correct vesting schedule where, you know, they earn out their equity over 4 years. You don't want there's too many people who give 20% of their company to someone on day one because they don't know any better, and
Yeah.
that can be a nightmare. Trying to get that equity back or whatever is really tough. So I think that is the number one thing. Titles, irrelevant of titles.
So, technical founder, so I haven't had this issue, but I have had certain situations where people like follow me around parties.
Yeah.
I've got the next Facebook. And I've seen and I also helped with some startups before. I have my own now. But is there a way to kind of reverse vet for coming from a technical to somebody that's like, I got this brilliant idea? One of the things you mentioned earlier was you had a built-in audience before, but is there other methods that technical people could use to vet the companies when there's so many, when it's so disproportionate, you know, number of ideas versus the time you have?
That's a good question. I mean, one of the things that I find troubling is so often I'll meet with people, you know, startup founders, and they'll pitch you their idea and you'll say, oh, so have you heard about X? And when they say no, that's a big problem, because any idea you have, there's probably been some angle of it at some point. If it's a big enough problem, someone has tried to solve it, maybe in a different way. But I think it's super important if you're talking to someone who's non-technical to really understand how deeply do they understand the industry, the problem, and the history. Like, why have things in the space not worked? And what's different? Why are you going to do this different? It could just be a better time. Like this it didn't work then because of, you know, there wasn't 5G, so that didn't work. The technical limitations were there. But I really think finding out from them in your space, solving your problem, not your solution, but solving how have other people solved the problem in the past, what has worked and hasn't worked. I think making sure they understand the context in which they're launching a company is super important. And the amount of people who are like, I've seen that pitch done 7 times, and I've seen 5 of those companies fail over the last 5 years, and you don't know about any of them. That's a big warning sign. And so as a founder, I'd say really make sure you understand. There's another startup cliche, which is love the problem, not your solution. And so your solution is going to change, you're going to pivot, you're going to realize there's issues or whatever, but if you deeply understand the problem you're solving, then, and you've got the right team to do it, the solution works itself out if you've got the right people. So make sure they understand the problem inside and out.
Yeah, I think I chat with not customers, but startup founders, especially at the idea stage sometimes, given my role, and have you lived the problem, or have you seen it one time and you're like, this could be big? Or have they talked to potential customers about it? Because if they have gone through that, initial we haven't built anything, but if this was available to you, is that something that you would buy? Is that something you literally give money for? Have they had those kind of customer discovery conversations? Do they have customers, or do they need you to go build it for them? That's something that I chat with the business side of the co-founder relationship, where they're like, we need to find somebody to go build this. Well, you need to go to that person and say, this is what it's going to take to build this, as opposed to, we just need this built, figure it out. That's my advice to the CEO of the co-founder relationship. Figure it out on your own, maybe scrap together something in Google Sheets, show it to somebody, and then go from there. But I think, did they live the problem? Did they experience it? And have they talked to actual customers is important too.
And in that, I think that I'm a big fan of high fidelity mock-ups, so using InVision or whatever to really show you can have designs and create hotspots so someone can click and it goes to a new design page, and getting that feedback, putting that in front of people before you write a line of code. So that's how we operate, is we do design prototyping before we write any code at all. And then when talking to people, I'd say, not just, do you like this? Because it was yeah, sure, I don't want to hurt your feelings, but how much would you pay for this? Really getting something, you probably won't get a commitment, but do you like this? Pretty much everyone's going to say yes all the time. And so it's really do you think this solves your problem, and how much would you pay for this? And that's when they're going to be oh, no, I like it, but I don't quite know if it's it's not relevant to me or whatever. When you talk about dollars, that changes the whole conversation. So I get to that feedback pretty quickly.
I think it's a good distinction, yeah.
Yeah, I was just going to add on to that. I think one thing you realize is that distribution is probably the hardest part, and building, as we know, is probably the easiest. So finding someone who, if you just ask them what their distribution network is, right? If they already have a podcasting audience, or they already have a blog, that's the hardest part. And so with that, and as you're touching on, if they did something related that someone actually gave them money for. I spoke with someone recently who is actually one of my customers, and he was asking me about an idea he had. And it turns out he's actually a consultant on the side, helping small businesses do the thing he does, charging $1,500 a month, which is just basically interpreting CSV. And he's like, I want to automate this. And so it's clear validation there that he's already getting paid to solve the problem. Now he just needs help finding a better way to do it. And there's so many ideas out there, and so many people, as you're saying, that I think narrowing it down is almost a little too easy, where you may be left with 1 out of 100.
And that's the challenge founders face these days in fundraising, is the investors have so many people pitching them. As a technical person, imagine if you've got $5 million in your bank ready to deploy as angel funds. And that's why the bar keeps raising. When I started raising money, a seed round was you've got an idea, and now, there's a bunch of seed funds that want 100K MRR before they'll put in seed money. And so that bar keeps raising, because if it was your money, surely you would as well. If you've got the option to say, I'm going to put money in a company that has paying customers versus someone who has an idea and hasn't built out a team, you're probably going to make that same decision. And so there's a lot of startups. The cost of building a company with AWS and such, the friction in creating tech has gone down so dramatically. So now the friction is distribution, sales, pricing. And so having worked those things out becomes the new kind of seed round, basically. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Every time you go to chat with the VC, know that there are 10 other companies that they are comparing you to. And at least 10 other companies. Yeah. It's, they've got 5 days out of the week, and they can make a lot of meetings happen because they're the ones with the cash that they can hand out like a commodity. So
And that's why they don't sign NDAs.
Exactly.
yeah, absolutely. So that's an interesting point. I mean, we kind of touched lightly upon it. You've raised $2 million so far. How did you kind of view the VC process? Was it like, we do need to raise funding, or was it we want to raise funding? What kind of process did you kind of go through in your mind when raising venture capital and or just angels, whatever?
So I went on, I think it was How I Raised This podcast, went in more detail to this, but basically, from my experience, I kind of reached out to my network and said, I've got this travel tech thing, what do you think? And a guy who used to be head of biz dev at Kayak said, I love this, you should talk to this angel investor. And so I went to her, she was the ex-president of Travelocity, she invested. And as soon as she invested, actually I asked her to be a mentor first. And so it's kind of a bit of a long game. She was a mentor for 3 months, we built a really good relationship, and when it was time to start fundraising, I said, hey, we're about to open a round of fundraising, I'd love intros, but better than intros, if you could put in a token amount of funding, that would really help, just as a signal. You can pick the amount, I'm not going to apply any minimums or whatever. And she came in, and then she made a lot more intros. And so we got CEOs and CMOs from HomeAway and Sabre and like great industry people invested as angels. And I didn't do that in Austin. I specifically didn't do that in Austin because Austin has some very, you can close your ears quickly.
No, you're about to say something that I probably agree with.
But Austin has some very sort of preconceived ideas around values and funding and such. And so Capital Factory, CTAN, a lot of these groups say, our starting point is X cap, like here's our default terms. Anything outside of that is gonna be blah, 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 blah. And so I didn't want to start in Austin. And so I started outside of Austin, going to the coast, going to industry people, and came back knowing that I didn't have the revenue being so new, but I knew that the buy-in from the ex-founding CMO or CEO from Sabre and president of Travelocity was going to carry a lot of weight, going to CTAN, going to all these local angels. And so I went to them and said, look, terms are set, they're not set to Austin standards, they're set somewhere in between us and the coasts. So I wasn't being super aggressive, but we've got a cap that's a little more aggressive than typical Austin first round. And the round is up and going. I've got 5 strategic angels with C-level titles. Are you in or are you out? And so I raised the round that way. And so it was very sort of staged and strategic and slow. I just knew getting that first, person as a mentor, and then as a small investor, she just opened up her entire network, and I brought in all these great people. And then I was sitting with Mark Nathan at Capital Factory, just the value of being around this environment, just sitting in the kitchen, giving him a demo of my browser extension, and Craig Cummins, who's the VP at Moonshots Capital, he was walking by, and his company, he was about to finish his earn-out at Daimler. And so Craig was walking by, and Mark grabbed him and said, hey, you've been complaining about how much you hate booking travel at this big company since selling Ride Scout, check this out. And so I gave him a quick demo of how you can book corporate travel on Expedia, and he was like, I'm going to invest. Not now, but I'm going to finish my earn-out, it's going to be 3 months, then I'm going to raise a fund, and then I'm going to invest. I was like, okay, cool, And a year later, they led our last round. They came in as our lead, and we just kind of kept that conversation going, kept showing him progress and updates and such. And so they were our first, outside of Capital Factory, but our first kind of institutional was Moonshots. Yeah.
I'm curious why you choose the startup path instead of more like going into an executive role, or now that with your experience behind you,
Yeah.
you probably jump in, not just be the cubicle. So what is it about that, and if it errs more on the side of sort of freedom and creativity, how do you find that having investors and having teams and those responsibilities, does that change or restrict what you were looking to get out of the experience?
I would definitely say it's the freedom and creativity. I don't think I'm like working in a big corporation like Keller Williams, where you're just sort of, here's your day-to-day work, and you know that this Monday is going to look like Monday in 6 months' time. I found that a little restrictive, and I'd sort of come up with all these ideas all the time, and I'd always be pitching my boss, and it would drive her crazy. Just like, just write the newsletter and just, go sit down. And so that was a little, for me, I kind of pushed a bit against those bounds. And so I do love the feedback that a startup gives you, that I get to wake up and say, just had a dream about how we could potentially approach this problem, and we can create design mock-ups within a matter of days. We can put that in front of a customer and get feedback and be like, yeah, forget it. Like, there's no, you're able to be so nimble and change and pivot and move very quickly. So I do like that. I think having the right investors is very important. I've had investors who are optometrists who know nothing about startups. And then I've had a lot of like traditional angel, plug and play is the biggest investor in travel technology. So they're used to that sort of stuff. So I think it is important to try and get as many investors in who understand how things can ebb and flow. And I think showing your work, I have a board. We have a board pre-Series A, and a lot of people would advise against that, but my board is super valuable to me. We get together, it's just kind of like structured work sessions, and they know the space, they know what happens, why it happens, they know that things can change and customers and pivots and all that stuff. So I have advisors on a board that I engage with a lot, and so I still feel a lot of freedom, just because I'm not hiding it from anyone. They're sort of seeing, we tried this, it didn't work, here's what we measured, here's why we're changing, here's the research behind that. And I don't think I'm going to push back on anything like, no, don't do that, we ban you on doing that. It's really just having a process behind it though. We're not just willy-nilly flipping and changing things. We really are like interviewing customers, doing industry feedback and research and such. Yeah.
So, just to go way back, you were talking about the first business, everybody kind of parted ways. Did you go through a process of like a mental reset during that period? I mean, it must have taken quite a bit to get back in after that.
Yeah, it was tough. I sold my car. Like, it was one of those things where we were trying to keep things going. Like, family moved to a smaller house. Like, didn't take it lightly. This was my baby, and one of the big challenges is you've kind of got to draw a line in the sand and say, this is what we measure. This is our North Star. And if this isn't going well and we can't fix it, we need to change. We need to make plans. And we didn't do that. We kept like, oh shit, we just had a call with Justin Bieber. That means we're going to be successful. Let's just keep going. Let's just keep trying. And like every single little sparkle you just follow, and you think this is a new sign of the new sign of progress or whatever. There's a great line in a Netflix cartoon show, BoJack Horseman, where the one character says, if you're wearing rose-colored glasses, all the red flags just look like flags. And so, like, you just are so desperate for this to work that you aren't looking at the warning signs. And so I think if we had said, okay, by this date, if we don't get this signed or hit this revenue or this fundraising, let's just part ways. And instead, the founders and I don't talk anymore. There was a lot of resentment about who's going to be the last man standing. It was like, well, I ended up being the last guy, and this person was like, well, I've got family to support, I got to go do this, and we all ended up just like frustrated by it, and it just didn't end well, because we didn't say, okay guys, let's give whatever money we can back to the investors, let's call it a day. I think our investors would have been happy with us, we would have been happy with each other. Instead, it just slowly kind of faded away, and I'd pick up consulting gigs to kind of try and fill the gaps, and it just wasn't a great feeling. And so for me, it really was this startup gig started as I get on stage and I get $400K. This is easy to like, this is really hard and takes a toll on your family and personal life. And so I was ready for just something else, and being able to just say, okay, I'm not following ideas, I'm not going to be a staff founder. It was good for me to actually join a company and not start my own at that point. I didn't have all the pressures, I wasn't doing all the fundraising, I was able to just focus on the product, interact with customers. They had funding, so it was a nice like midpoint for me, I think. Yeah, that answered it.
We got time for like one or two more questions.
So you mentioned creativity and being the kind of person that has all these ideas, right?
Yeah.
And I have notebooks full of mostly bad, but occasionally decent ideas. When you get to the point that you're at where like this is your focus, you know, with what I do, I get to play with all sorts of stuff and there's nobody watching the clock. What do you do with that, the things that you can't put into your company these days?
Yeah, I just had 2 days ago, I had a new idea that kind of came from my experience in the company where I was like, this is a problem we have and it's not in trouble, but I really think there's a great solution to that. And I kind of ran it through the lean startup framework. Ash's first book, he presented it here. I've still got like a galley copy, I guess, so like just stapled together with the pages all dog-eared and stuff. And so creating that lean canvas and really working through that and tucking it away for later. You know, I have a lot of like balsamic mock-ups that I've created that I just have this file that at some point, if and when I have some time on my hands, you know, and some people can run, I mean, you know, obviously the biggest example is Elon Musk, like being able to run all these companies at the same time, it seems insane. Like I cannot imagine taking on another thing. So I definitely am not trying to do anything on the side. But I definitely, like, I like to play in that space and almost as a hobby. Like I like to mock things up, outline the customer problem, create balsamic mock-ups, and just sort of see if any time they're there when I need them. But for me, it's almost like a bit of a release to like get them on paper and such. Yeah.
I have a question. So let's say you come up with an idea or you have some sort of plan that you're working toward, metrics that you're measuring yourself by, and you find that, you know, obviously it's tougher than you thought it would be or whatnot, and you have challenges along the way. How do you balance like the sense of doubt that you get in your idea with the sense of like the need to be like realistic and take that feedback and you know, you need to pivot if you have to, but you also you don't want to pivot away like,
too early
or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's where a co-founder comes in, is really having that person to kind of like balance you with and say, I don't know if I'm overreacting to this. It is super nuanced. I don't know if there is a out and out answer. I mean, I think, you know, I always go back to the getting out of your own head and going to having a great advisory board or investors or people you can go to, family members, whatever it is, and just say, here's my struggles. How should I think about this? Because if you have an advisory board of people who've built companies before, they've all gone through it. Like no one has a to B path to success. You know, everyone. You know, luckily in the last few years, there's been a lot more openness with founders sharing their dark moments and the lonely times and such. And there was a good post being passed around LinkedIn this week. But it's great to have a group. I've got a group of people I have dinner with every now and again. And we'll just like, okay, NDAs all around. This stays at the table, but like it's good to have a moment and a community where you can just be like, yeah, freaking customer, this pilot is taking 3 months longer than it was meant to. We don't know what to do, and just to like get it out of you, because it can be tough, and you can feel like you're hiding it a little bit from your family or your team, and you've got to bear the weight of all the responsibility and the paychecks and their families and such. And so it's good to have those outlets, be it, you know, a mentor or a peer group, I think, to bounce ideas off of. I'm not a member of EO, but I really want to be. I think that's the next thing I want to do. And I've had friends who just like really love that, the entrepreneurs organization, and they have, I think it's quarterly meetings, and you sort of really just get these sessions where you get to meet with other founders at the same sort of level and really have a structured peer group. So I think that's probably the next thing I want to do, because mine's always been informal, but it's been super important for me to have people I can just spew poison out to and come out of it and be like, all right, great, I feel so much better. More importantly, I'm seeing other people are, you know, from the outside, looks like it's great, but they're also going through struggles, and we all go through different things at different times. You've just got to keep your head down. And being a founder, you do have to be fairly self-delusional, like you're going up against crazy odds. So I think it is good to get an outside perspective to be like, am I just too in love with my idea, you know?
Yeah. So I'm actually getting the eyes from the team outside. she came by and she was like, wrap it up. So I just want to be respectful of Daniel's time as well. Give him a quick round of applause, everybody. Thanks for sharing the story, the ups and downs. Tuesdays here at Capital Factory, always something going on. Fourth Tuesday, you can come here for this. We bring somebody new every month. How can we help you? Are you hiring? What do you need?
I hope I wasn't too negative. I feel like I could have left that on a note. But I mean, I think it really is the community, like being part, and that's why I've been part of Capital Factory. I've brought 3 companies through here. That community, having that where you can celebrate together, you can, have the realistic talks together. So I think that's good. We are going to be hiring early next year, and so that's keep an eye out for on our social profiles and such. I mean, we're busy working with a channel partner where we're very focused on certain deliverables and things and such. So we're in an interesting phase of the company. Kind of a big growth phase, but growth in a specific direction. And so there's not a lot of external stuff. I'd love to chat and meet you guys, but yeah, I think that the community aspect is the most important part of this whole journey, really.
I didn't tell him to say that, but if you want to talk more about the sales community, that's my job, so happy to chat about it. Thanks, y'all. Really appreciate you showing up tonight. It's fun.